The apartment felt like a tomb, and Daniel Brooks sat on the edge of the couch
Can't
staring at
believe
the
you!
empty space
I'm
where
sorry,
Emily's
I didn't-
photograph used to rest
Sorry
on the
isn't
shelf.
enough!
He had removed all traces of her 3 days ago after she walked out with that smile that would haunt him for months to come. It wasn't an angry departure or a sorrowful goodbye. It was a smile of relief, pure, untainted relief, as if she had been released from a burden she had carried for far too long. The divorce papers sat in a folder on the coffee table, signed and finalized just hours before Emily had posted that photograph on social media showing her at a champagne bar with friends. Her caption read, "Finally free," with 3 champagne glass emojis. Daniel had seen it before his brother Michael called to warn him, and that was when his heart had shattered all over again. He thought they would grieve together, or at least pretend to respect what they once had. But Emily had moved into celebration mode, as if their 4 years of marriage meant nothing. Daniel was a thoughtful man, someone who analyzed his own behavior constantly. He worked as a high school history teacher and prided himself on understanding human complexity and motivation. So he sat with his own pain for hours, trying to understand where he had failed. What had he done to make her so eager to leave? What had he missed that would cause someone to smile like that when their marriage dissolved? He replayed conversations and moments, searching for the fracture point, but found only shadows and uncertainties. His apartment in Portland was quiet, too quiet. The walls seemed to close in on him each evening as he sat with nothing but his thoughts and a glass of whiskey. His friends had offered support in those initial days, bringing casseroles and sitting awkwardly in his living room, but he had dismissed them all. He told them he needed time to process, that he needed solitude to understand what had happened. But truthfully, he was spiraling into isolation, wrapping himself in blame and regret. Then there was that knock on the door, 2 days after the finalization papers were signed. Daniel opened it to find Claire Mitchell standing in the hallway, and his breath caught in his throat. Emily's younger sister looked anxious, with worry etched across her face and tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She was holding a small overnight bag, and she looked like she had been driving for hours. Her hair was disheveled, and her hands trembled as she stood before him. "I need to talk to you," Claire said without preamble, and Daniel stepped aside, letting her into the apartment that still smelled like Emily's vanilla perfume. She walked slowly, as if carrying an enormous weight, and when she finally turned to face him, there was guilt written all over her features. "I can't stay silent anymore, and I know I shouldn't be here, but what Emily did to you wasn't right. She wasn't right." Claire sat down heavily and looked at Daniel with an intensity he had never seen in her before, and he realized in that moment that this conversation would change everything. Claire sat with her hands folded in her lap, trembling as she gathered the courage to speak. Daniel made tea because it seemed like the right thing to do, and when he handed her the warm mug, her fingers wrapped around it, seeking comfort and stability. She took a long sip and then began to tell him things that would rewrite everything he thought he understood about his failed marriage. "Emily never wanted the divorce," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was scared of how she was treating you, and she didn't know how to fix it." Daniel sat across from her, processing these words that contradicted everything Emily had shown him. In the final months, she had been cold, distant, and increasingly hostile. Her words had cut like blades, and her indifference had made him feel like a ghost in their own home. But according to Claire, that distance was born from fear, not from falling out of love. "Emily was terrified that you would leave her first," Claire continued, and her eyes filled with tears. "She created distance because she thought if she pushed you away, she could control the ending. She could be the one to decide when it was over, and not the victim of abandonment. Emily had abandonment issues stemming from their parents' divorce when she was young.
She had never fully healed from that trauma, and it manifested in her relationships as a destructive pattern. Daniel listened as Claire explained how Emily had confessed everything to her just days before the divorce was finalized. Emily had told Claire that she loved Daniel, but she was terrified of losing him. She had convinced herself that he would eventually realize he deserved better, and she couldn't bear the thought of being left behind. So she created a narrative where she was the strong, independent woman moving forward, when in reality, she was running away from her own pain. The smile wasn't happiness, Claire said. It was a defense mechanism, a shield against the agony she felt inside. Emily told me she cried for hours after posting that photo. She locked herself in her hotel room, and she sobbed until she had no tears left. She told me your face when you saw her at the courtroom kept replaying in her mind, and she regretted every cold word, every distance, every moment she pushed you away. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. A mixture of anger, confusion, and unexpected compassion began to surface. He had spent 3 days drowning in blame, thinking he was the failure, but the truth was far more complicated. Emily had self-sabotaged their marriage out of deep-seated fear and insecurity. Claire reached across and grabbed his hand with desperation in her eyes. "There's more, Daniel." She paused, and her voice became even quieter. "Emily sent me here because she couldn't face you. She wanted me to tell you the truth, but she was too afraid that you would reject her even more, that you would hate her for being honest. I came because I care about you too, and I couldn't let you carry this weight of thinking you failed, when really, we all failed each other through our own brokenness and lies."
Daniel didn't ask Claire to leave that night. Instead, he found himself wanting her to stay, wanting to hear more about Emily, wanting to understand the roots of their destruction. They sat long into the evening talking, and as the hours passed, something unexpected began to unfold between them. The conversation shifted from Emily to their own lives, their own dreams, their own wounded places. Claire spoke about her own fear of abandonment, how she had watched Emily suffer and had never found the courage to truly help her. She spoke about feeling helpless and guilty for not being brave enough to intervene. Daniel listened with the full attention of someone who had spent years in a classroom listening to young people reveal their truths. He recognized something in Claire, a kindred spirit, someone who also carried the weight of others' pain, someone who blamed herself for things beyond her control. He found himself leaning closer as she spoke, and he found himself seeing her not as Emily's sister, but as Claire, a woman with her own beautiful complexity, her own struggles, her own tender heart. By midnight, they had finished 3 pots of tea and several hours of conversation that felt like peeling back layers of themselves to reveal what lay underneath. Claire told Daniel about her work as a therapist and how ironic it was that she could help her clients work through their trauma but could barely help her own sister. Daniel shared stories from his classroom about teaching history and how he believed that understanding the past was essential to building a better future, but he struggled to apply that wisdom to his own life. There was a moment when their hands touched as they both reached for the same teacup, and neither of them pulled away. The contact felt electric and forbidden, and necessary all at once. Daniel realized with startling clarity that he was beginning to feel something for Claire, something that went beyond gratitude or even curiosity. It was attraction mixed with emotional intimacy, mixed with the recognition of 2 broken people finding solace in each other. Claire felt it too. He could see it in how her breathing changed, how her eyes softened, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that was both vulnerable and inviting. She knew this was dangerous territory. She knew that pursuing anything with Daniel while still bound to Emily through loyalty and history was complicated and potentially destructive. But she also knew that she had never felt as seen and understood as she did in that moment with him. "I should probably go to bed," Claire said finally, though neither of them moved. Daniel nodded but remained sitting close to her. "I have a spare bedroom down the hall," he said, his voice quiet. She accepted, and as she stood to leave, her hand lingered on his shoulder for just a moment longer than necessary.
The touch sent shivers through both of them aware that something had shifted. That night, Daniel lay awake thinking about Claire, about Emily, about the tangled web of feelings and obligations that now defined his existence. He thought about how quickly human connection could shift and transform, how attraction could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances when two wounded souls found themselves in proximity. He thought about whether it was possible to build something real with Claire, or if they were just two damaged people using each other as band-aids for deeper wounds. Down the hall, Claire lay awake as well, her own mind racing with guilt and longing, knowing that she had crossed an invisible line simply by allowing herself to feel what she felt, and that crossing had made everything infinitely more complicated.
The next morning brought awkwardness and coffee and the kind of tension that comes from two people who have felt something shift between them but are not yet ready to name it. Claire emerged from the spare bedroom in borrowed clothes from Daniel, and they moved around the kitchen like dancers who had not yet learned the choreography. Their eyes met briefly and then looked away, and the energy between them crackled with unspoken words. "Daniel, I think we need to talk about what happened," Claire said finally as she sat at the kitchen table. He nodded, knowing she was right, but also knowing that naming it would make everything real and irreversible. "Nothing happened, Claire," he said carefully, "but we both felt something, and we both know that pursuing anything right now would be complicated and potentially harmful to everyone involved." Claire was quiet for a long moment, and then she made a decision that would change the course of everything. "I need to call Emily," she said, and Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Emily deserves to know that I came here, and more importantly, she deserves to know how I feel about you and how you might feel about me." She picked up her phone with shaking hands, and before Daniel could protest, she had already dialed Emily's number. The phone rang 3 times before Emily answered, and her voice came through confused and wary. "Claire, what is going on? Why are you calling me at 7 in the morning?" "Emily, I need you to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." Claire took a deep breath, and she told her sister everything. About coming to see Daniel, about their late-night conversation, about the way she had felt her heart open in a way she had never experienced before, about the dangerous attraction that was blossoming between her and the man who had been Emily's husband just hours before. There was silence on the other end of the phone, a long, heavy silence that seemed to stretch into infinity, and then Emily began to cry. Claire said nothing, giving her sister space to process and to feel and to break apart if that was what she needed, because sometimes people needed permission to fall apart before they could begin to heal. Emily finally spoke, her voice raw and broken. "Do you love him, Claire?" Claire looked at Daniel across the kitchen table, and she saw the fear in his eyes, and the hope, and the conflict, and she knew she could not lie, not anymore, not about something this important. "Yes," she whispered, "I do, and I'm terrified, and I feel guilty, and I know this is wrong, but I also know that he deserves happiness, and maybe I can give him that in a way you never could, because you were too afraid. Emily, I came to help Daniel, but I stayed because I found something I didn't know I was looking for. I found someone who sees me, who understands my brokenness and doesn't ask me to be less broken." Emily cried harder. "I deserve this," she said finally, her voice hollow and defeated. "I pushed him away, and I hurt him, and now he's finding comfort with someone else, and that someone else is my own sister, and I have no right to be angry because I made these choices. I destroyed this marriage with my own hands and my own fear." Daniel could hear Emily falling apart through the phone, and he felt a complicated surge of compassion mixed with his own need to finally move forward. Before hanging up, Emily said one last thing. "Tell him I wish I had been brave enough to be honest when it mattered. Tell him he deserves real love, not just a second chance at something broken. Tell him I finally understand what I lost, and maybe someday he can forgive me. Even if he chooses you, Claire, even if you two build a life together, I need to know that he will eventually forgive me." Part 5. New Beginnings.
3 months passed, and Daniel and Claire found themselves navigating the delicate terrain of a relationship built on honesty, vulnerability, and the shared understanding that love could arrive from the most unexpected sources. They had not rushed into anything. Instead, they had taken time to process their own traumas, to build trust, and to ensure that what they were creating together was real and not just a reaction to their individual pain. The turning point came when Emily reached out one evening, asking to meet with both Daniel and Claire. She chose a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Portland, and when she arrived, she looked different, softer, less defended. She had been in therapy, and she had done the real work of understanding her abandonment issues and her self-sabotaging patterns. She had learned to take responsibility for her choices instead of blaming others or circumstances. "I came to apologize," Emily said, looking directly at Daniel and then at Claire. "And I came to tell you both that I see you now. I see that you found each other and that you have something real, and I am learning to accept that, even though it is painful. I hurt you, Daniel," voice steady, "by running away, by creating distance, by being dishonest about what I was feeling. I let my own fears destroy something beautiful, and I will carry that regret for a long time. But I also want you to know that I am genuinely happy that you found Claire, someone who can be present with you, someone who can love you without the shadow of my trauma standing in the way." Daniel felt tears in his eyes, crying silently, not from pain, but from the recognition that everyone involved had finally begun to heal. Emily had found her own path to self-awareness and growth. Claire reached over and squeezed his hand, squeezing gently, and he saw in her eyes that same recognition that they had all suffered and learned and grown. With Emily, there came also forgiveness, not complete erasure of what had happened, but a genuine willingness on all their parts to move forward, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. Daniel told Emily about his own role in their failed marriage, about how he had retreated into silence instead of communicating, how he had allowed resentment to build instead of addressing problems head-on. He acknowledged that their marriage needed both of them to fail for it to truly collapse, and that blame was a weapon that only wounded deeper. As the meeting ended, Emily hugged both Daniel and Claire, hugging tightly, and she meant it. She had finally learned to love them in a way that was healthy and whole and unselfish. 6 months later, Claire moved in with Daniel, and they began building a life together, slowly, carefully, with eyes wide open to both the beauty and the potential pitfalls of what they were creating. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Daniel paused and looked at Claire. "You know, this is unconventional, right?" he said, smiling warmly. "A man falling in love with his ex-wife's sister." Claire laughed, laughing genuinely, and kissed him on the cheek. "We are unconventional people, Daniel. We have been through unconventional pain, and we found each other through unconventional circumstances. Maybe that means we get to build something unconventional and beautiful together." Daniel thought about Emily, thought about Claire, thought about the journey that had brought them all to this place of healing and growth, and he realized that love was not always a straight line. It was messy and complicated, and sometimes it arrived when you least expected it, wearing the face of someone you never thought you would fall for. But when it was real, when it was built on honesty and emotional safety and genuine understanding, it could transcend even the most impossible circumstances. Pulling Claire close, as they stood together in the kitchen with the sunset painting everything golden, Daniel whispered, "I love you," and Claire whispered back, "I love you too." And in that moment, despite all the complexity and the judgment that might come from others, they knew that they had found something worth fighting for, something real, something true, something that could only have been born from the ashes of their collective brokenness.